Picture a boy sharing one bedroom with three brothers, a cramped apartment in the Bronx. His father paints other people's houses for pennies. His mother stretches every dollar like her family's survival depends on it. Because it does. This boy has no money for new clothes. He wears his older brother's hand-me-downs. He has no design degree. He has no connections in the fashion world. He doesn't even have a name people take seriously. Kids in the neighborhood turn Lifshits into a punchline every single day. You'd think a boy like that has exactly one realistic future. Live the same life his father lived. Paint walls, count pennies. Never make it out of the block he was born on. Instead, this boy grows up to build a $10 billion brand. He will dress US presidents. He will dress Hollywood stars. He will dress Olympic athletes on the biggest stage in the world. His logo, a tiny polo player on horseback, will be instantly recognizable in Tokyo, in London, in Shanghai, in every corner of the planet. And he starts with one drawer in a desk on the 17th floor of the Empire State Building. Selling ties nobody wanted to buy, don't scroll past that, let it sink in. A boy who never learned to cut a pattern, who never set foot in design school, is about to build one of the most profitable fashion empires in American history. His name is Ralph Lauren. Today I'm breaking down 6 turning points in his life, moments that could each have ended this story before it started. Turning point 4 is the one where he walks away from a deal that could have saved his business because he refuses to sell out his own name. Turning point 6 shows you why even a billion-dollar empire can collapse in a few short years, and exactly what it took to save it. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is another lucky break story. Another case of being in the right place at the right time. Here's why that's wrong. Every decision this man made was a deliberate choice against the odds, against advice, against his own short-term interest. That's exactly why it works like a formula, not a fluke. October 14th, 1939. Ralph Lifshitz is born in the Bronx, New York, the youngest of 4 children. His parents, Frank and Frida, were Ashkenazi Jewish immigrants who had fled violence and poverty in Pinsk, Belarus, chasing the American dream. What they found instead was a 1-bedroom apartment in one of New York's toughest neighborhoods, 4 kids sharing a single room, and survival meaning Frank painting houses while Frida made every cent count. There was never money for luxuries, but even as a boy, Ralph showed something his siblings didn't have. On Saturdays he'd sit in movie theaters, mesmerized, not by the plot, but by the clothes. Cary Grant in a perfectly tailored suit, Fred Astaire gliding across the screen in elegant evening wear, Katharine Hepburn in boots and jodhpurs. To young Ralph, these weren't just actors, they were living proof that clothes could transport you to another world, a better world, and he wanted to live there. By age 12, Ralph had saved enough from odd jobs to buy his first 3-piece suit. He'd walk through the Bronx wearing it like armor, turning himself from a poor immigrant kid into someone who mattered. It wasn't designer, it wasn't expensive. But the confidence he wore it with, a confidence that had nothing to do with his actual circumstances, made people notice. He'd tie a Shetland sweater around his shoulders just so, roll his jeans a particular distinctive way, take his older brother's hand-me-downs and wear them with such style that nobody could tell they weren't new. His older brother Jerry would later say Ralph just had a natural gift for putting himself together. He just had style. Calvin Klein, a fellow Bronx kid who lived nearby and would become his lifelong rival, remembered that Ralph dressed like nobody else around. Already in high school, selling handmade ties to classmates, Ralph was thinking like an entrepreneur. He already understood one thing: style is currency. But there was a problem, a big one. The name Lifshitz was a target. Kids at school mocked it relentlessly. In the 1950s, being different was dangerous. Being Jewish in a rough neighborhood was hard enough. Having a name that sounded like a joke
Oh,
made
look,
you a
it's
walking
Lifshitz!
target. At
Lifshitz!
16,
Lifshitz!
Ralph
What a
and his
name!
brother legally changed their surname to Lauren. Some say it was inspired by Lauren Bacall, another Bronx native. Others believe it just sounded sophisticated, aspirational, American. This wasn't just a name change. It was his first act of self-invention, his first deliberate step toward becoming someone else, someone better. And he would never stop reinventing himself. Don't scroll past this either. Think about it for a second. A 16-year-old with no money, no education, no connections, already deciding to rewrite his own identity. Not because someone helped him, because he understood something. If the world isn't ready to accept you as you were born, become who you want to be instead. After high school, Ralph enrolled at Baruch College to study business. On paper it made sense. Learn the fundamentals, get a degree, find security. But Ralph dropped out after 2 years. The classroom couldn't teach him what he actually needed to know. And besides, the US Army was calling. From 1962 to 1964, Ralph served his country. The military taught him discipline, precision, attention to detail. It didn't kill his dream. If anything, those 2 years sharpened his vision. He saw how a uniform commands respect, how the right clothing conveys authority, purpose, identity. After his discharge, Ralph landed a job as a sales assistant at Brooks Brothers, the temple of traditional American menswear. This was where old money families bought their Oxford shirts and navy blazers, where Ivy League students got their preppy uniforms. Ralph wasn't just selling ties and jackets, he was getting a real education in American style, understanding that the wealthy don't chase trends. They buy quality, timelessness, heritage. But Ralph himself was still broke, still on the outside looking in. Working first at Brooks Brothers, then at a tie company called Rivets, he watched wealthy customers buy expensive clothes with the casual ease of people who had never known want. He was 27 years old, making minimum wage, living with his new wife, Ricky, in a tiny apartment under the elevated subway line in Manhattan. Trains rattled overhead every few minutes, shaking the walls. They had nothing. No savings, no safety net, just a dream. And that's when Ralph saw it, the moment that changed everything. It happened in 1966. Ralph was walking out of a store when he bumped into Douglas Fairbanks Jr., the 1930s film star. Fairbanks was wearing a European-cut, double-breasted suit with a spread-collar shirt. His tie was wide, bold, the exact opposite of the narrow, boring ties everyone wore in mid-1960s Manhattan. It was elegant, confident. Ralph thought, I can make ties like that, I can make them better. At 28, working for tie manufacturer Beau Brummel, Ralph approached the company president with an idea. He wanted to design his own line of ties, wider than the standard width, made from luxurious fabrics, sold under his own label. The president looked at this nobody salesman with no design training and told him something Ralph would never forget. The world isn't ready for Ralph Lauren. Ralph took it as a compliment, because the world was about to get ready, whether it liked it or not. In 1967, Ralph launched his tie collection. He borrowed $50,000 to get started. He worked out of a single drawer in a showroom at the Empire State Building. One drawer, that was it. He designed the ties himself, made the deliveries himself, pitched to stores across Manhattan himself. His ties were 4 inches wide at a time when narrow was in. They were made from opulent fabrics when cheap polyester dominated the market. He was doing the exact opposite of everyone else. He called his brand Polo, not because he played the sport. He'd never even been near a polo match. But the name conjured images of aristocracy, of weekend estates, of a lifestyle most Americans could only dream about. It was aspirational marketing before the term existed. Ralph wasn't selling ties, he was selling access to a world. Let that sit for a second. That's the key idea of this entire story. The product was just the excuse. The real thing being sold was a dream of belonging to a world Ralph himself had never been let into. The first real breakthrough came when a buyer from Neiman Marcus spotted Ralph's ties in a small shop and tracked him down. The buyer flew all the way to Dallas for the meeting. Ralph hated flying, but he went anyway, and walked out with an order for 1,200 ties. His first serious sale. Proof that his instincts were right. But the real test would come with Bloomingdale's, the most prestigious department store in America, the store that set the trends, the store every designer wanted into. Getting into Bloomingdale's wasn't just about sales, it was about legitimacy. When Ralph finally landed a meeting with Bloomingdale's buyer, they loved his ties, the width, the fabric, the sophistication. They wanted to stock them, feature them prominently. There was just one condition, actually 2. Ralph had to make the ties narrower, more in line with what was currently selling. and he had to strip off his Polo label and replace it with the Bloomingdale's label. Standard practice, they told him. This is how the business works. This is the price of admission. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, this is the chance of a lifetime. Who in their right mind turns that down? Here's why it wasn't that simple. Ralph was 28 years old. He was broke. He desperately needed exactly this sale. This was the opportunity he'd been working toward his whole career. And Bloomingdale's might well have been his only shot. A second chance might never come. He sat in that room and felt his legs might give out. And he refused. I wasn't going to change the ties, and I didn't, he'd later recall. I just walked out. The next 6 months were brutal. He sold to small stores, barely scraping by. His wife Ricky, who believed in him completely, wrote him a heartfelt letter during those dark days. I would wish for the wings for you to fly. I believe in you and think you're going to do it. But belief doesn't pay rent.
After
the
you,
trains
Elizabeth.
kept shaking
Thank
their
you, darling.
apartment. The money kept not
It's quite
coming.
breathtaking inside.
Then, in early 1968, Bloomingdale's called back. They couldn't find ties like Ralph's anywhere else. They wanted all of them, under the Polo label, Ralph's Way. The decision to walk out of that meeting, to refuse to compromise, became the turning point of his life. 50 years later, speaking to Wall Street analysts, he'd say that if he'd changed that tie, he simply wouldn't exist as a brand today. 6 months after Bloomingdale's came back, Ralph's Polo ties had generated $500,000 in sales. By 1969, he'd secured something unprecedented, his own boutique inside Bloomingdale's. The first shop-in-shop dedicated to a single designer in American retail history. The boy who used to press his nose against department store windows now had his own space inside the most prestigious one in New York. But Ralph's vision was much bigger than ties. In 1968, he launched his first full menswear collection under the Polo name. Shirts, sport coats, slacks, suits, everything built around one philosophy: timeless American style with a hint of English aristocracy and a touch of Western romance. He had never been to design school. He didn't know how to cut a pattern. But he had something more valuable: taste, vision, and the ability to build an entire world around his clothes. In 1970, Ralph won his first Coty Award, fashion's highest honor, for menswear. Just 3 years after selling ties out of a drawer, he was being recognized as a major American designer. The kid from the Bronx had arrived, but that success almost destroyed everything he'd built. Riding high off the Coty win and the launch of his now iconic polo shirt, orders were pouring in. The brand was growing, too fast. Ralph was focused on design, on creativity, on building the dream. He wasn't focused on the fundamentals: inventory management, shipping logistics, financial planning. He'd later confessed to Forbes that he nearly blew the whole business. He wasn't shipping orders on time. Vendors weren't getting paid. Customers weren't getting their product. Ralph's artistic vision had built the brand, but his lack of business discipline was about to destroy it. He was drowning, and he knew it. Don't scroll past this. This is the exact moment that decides whether a story becomes a legend or another failed attempt. Ralph had two paths: keep doing the same thing and lose everything, or admit that talent alone doesn't build an empire. He chose the second path. Ralph took $150,000, his entire life savings, everything he had, and put it straight back into the company. Then he brought on Peter Strom from Norman Hilton as a business partner, giving him a 10% equity stake. Strom brought the operational discipline Ralph lacked. He shifted the company from direct manufacturing to licensing deals, which gave Ralph the room to focus on what he did best: creating beautiful things and marketing them brilliantly. It wasn't the last time Ralph would nearly lose everything, but the lesson stuck for good. You can't build an empire on talent alone. You need discipline, systems, and people who cover your blind spots. On March 12, 1971, Ralph opened his first standalone store on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. No American designer had ever opened their own freestanding store before. Retail space was for brands, not individual designers. But Ralph never cared what other people were doing. He wanted to build an experience, a world. Walking into a Ralph Lauren store meant stepping straight into the world Ralph had dreamed up as a boy in a Bronx movie theater. That same year, he introduced the polo player emblem for the first time, on a women's tailored shirt. That little logo, a rider on horseback, would become one of the most recognizable symbols in the world. More than a trademark, an icon. Shorthand for American luxury and preppy sophistication. In 1972, he launched what would become his signature product. The mesh polo shirt, in 17 colors, with the polo player on the chest. The tagline was simple and perfect. Every team has its color, polo has 17. It wasn't about fashion, it was about identity, belonging, choosing your own uniform while still being part of something bigger. Ralph's timing was perfect. American women were entering the workforce in record numbers. They needed clothes that projected authority without looking overtly masculine. Ralph's women's line, built on menswear-inspired tailoring, gave them exactly that. Then Hollywood came calling. In 1974, director Jack Clayton asked Ralph to design the costumes for The Great Gatsby, starring Robert Redford. Ralph dressed the entire male cast in 1920s-style suits and sweaters from his polo line. He even designed a custom pink suit specifically for Redford's Gatsby. The film became a cultural sensation, and suddenly everyone wanted to dress like they lived in Fitzgerald's world of wealth and glamour. 3 years later, Diane Keaton and Woody Allen wore his clothes throughout Annie Hall, cementing him as the designer who captured American style on screen. But Ralph wasn't just building a clothing brand, he was building a lifestyle empire. In 1978, he did something no designer had ever done. Launched 2 fragrances at once, one for men and one for women. Lauren for women on March 12th. Polo for men on March 26th. The bottles, the scents, the marketing, everything reinforced the world Ralph was creating. By 1981, Ralph opened his first international store on New Bond Street in London. An American designer opening a flagship store in the heart of British luxury retail. The irony was delicious. Ralph, who'd built his brand partly on English aristocratic style, was now exporting it right back to England. And the British loved it. I know exactly what you're thinking. How can a Jewish kid from the Bronx sell preppy clothes associated with old money and East Coast exclusivity? Critics asked him that his whole career. Ralph's answer was always the same. Does it have to do with class and money? It has to do with dreams. The 1980s were the decade Ralph Lauren became unavoidable. His suits became the uniform of Wall Street. Young bankers, freshly bonused, would walk into his stores and buy the same navy blazers and Oxford shirts their bosses wore. His polo shirts were worn by country club golfers and hip-hop artists alike. Kanye West would later credit Ralph Lauren with being one of the first luxury brands to embrace black culture, using black models like Tyson Beckford in campaigns that placed African-American men in the same rarefied settings traditionally reserved for the white elite. It was quietly revolutionary in an industry that rarely looked past its traditional wealthy white customer base. Ralph's brand crossed class lines while still keeping its luxury positioning. A Wall Street executive and a college student could both wear the polo player and both feel connected to something aspirational. That was the genius of Ralph's vision. He made expensive clothes feel accessible, and accessible clothes feel expensive. He understood something fundamental about human psychology. Everyone wants to believe they can belong to the club. Ralph sold membership. In 1983, Ralph expanded into home furnishings, pillows, bed linens, bath products, furniture, paint. Yes, paint. Over 400 different shades designed to help you build the Ralph Lauren aesthetic in your own home. Some people thought he'd lost his mind. Designers design clothes, not lifestyles. But Ralph understood what others didn't. His customers weren't buying products. They were buying a fantasy. And that fantasy had to extend well beyond the closet. The Rhinelander Mansion on Madison Avenue in New York, a Gilded Age masterpiece built in 1898, had by the 1980s become a shell of its former glory. In 1986, Ralph bought it and spent months restoring its original grandeur, working with designer Naomi Leff. They used 82,000 square feet of Honduran mahogany. Every detail was obsessed over. When it reopened as his flagship store, it wasn't just a retail space, it was a monument. John Fairchild, chairman of Women's Wear Daily, called it the best boutique in America, maybe the world. Consumers responded the only way they could, with money. By 1997, they were spending $5 billion a year on Ralph Lauren products. Ralph had become the best-selling designer in the world. Not the most cutting-edge, not the most avant-garde, but the most successful. Ralph understood something most designers never grasped. Most people don't want to be fashion victims. They want to look good, feel confident, project success. Ralph gave them the tools to do exactly that. On June 12, 1997, the Ralph Lauren Corporation went public on the New York Stock Exchange, becoming the largest publicly traded clothing company on the market. Ralph, who'd started with $50,000 borrowed from a tie manufacturer, now presided over a billion-dollar empire. He kept most of the voting shares, keeping total control over his creation. This was his baby, and nobody was going to tell him how to raise it. But going public brought new pressure. Wall Street wanted growth. Investors demanded quarterly improvements. The fashion industry was changing fast, and Ralph, now in his 60s, was being asked to adapt to a world moving faster than his timeless aesthetic could handle. And that's when he'd face the most personal, most terrifying challenge of his life, one that would force him to rethink exactly why he'd built all of this in the first place. In April 1987, Ralph underwent surgery to remove a benign brain tumor. The operation was successful, but it was a stark reminder of mortality. Ralph had built this incredible empire, but he was human, vulnerable, finite. Don't scroll past this one. Let it sit for a second. A man who had spent years selling the world a dream of eternal elegance and total control over his life suddenly found himself facing the one thing nobody can control at all. After his recovery, something shifted in him. He became more focused on giving back. In 1989, Ralph co-founded the Nina Hyde Center for Breast Cancer Research at Georgetown University. Nina Hyde was a fashion journalist who had died of breast cancer, and Ralph was determined to make a difference. In 1994, he helped launch Fashion Target's breast cancer with the Council of Fashion Designers of America, designing the logo himself. The initiative raised $2 million in its first year, selling Ralph Lauren FTBC t-shirts. Ralph didn't stop there. In 2003, he established the Ralph Lauren Center for Cancer Care and Prevention in Harlem, committing to provide top-quality cancer screening and treatment to underserved communities. In 2016, he donated $200 million to establish the Ralph Lauren Center for Cancer Care in partnership with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. $200 million from a man who once shared a bedroom with his brothers in the Bronx. Asked why he focused so heavily on cancer research and treatment, Ralph's answer was simple. I really believe you can do a lot of good things in this life. It can't be me, me, me all the time. You've got to give back. But even as Ralph built his philanthropic legacy, his company was facing an existential threat. By 2015, the same strategies that built the empire were now undermining it. The company had grown too fast, opened too many stores in mediocre locations, flooded the market with excess inventory. 26 different licensing deals meant Ralph Lauren products were being manufactured by outside companies with wildly varying quality standards. The brand was everywhere, which meant it was nowhere special. Licensing had diluted the brand's equity. Outlet stores were everywhere, making the brand feel less exclusive, less aspirational, less worth its premium price. Department stores like Macy's, which accounted for 11% of total revenue, were struggling as consumers shifted online. Fast fashion meant younger consumers had cheap alternatives that looked close enough. E-commerce was disrupting traditional retail. The entire luxury fashion industry was facing a reckoning, and Ralph Lauren, despite its heritage, was not immune. The stock crashed 40% in 2015, then another 20% in 2016. Revenue slipped from $7.6 billion to $7.4 billion. Operating income was falling. Investors were nervous. Analysts were downgrading the stock. Wall Street was panicking. The whispers started. Is Ralph Lauren finished? Has the brand lost relevance? Can it survive without Ralph? Can an 80-year-old designer who built his reputation on timeless classics compete in an era of Instagram influencers and TikTok trends? I know exactly what you're thinking. You're thinking this is the end of the story. The company just aged out along with its founder. Here's why that's wrong. The problem was never Ralph's taste. The problem was that the business model had grown so large it stopped being able to control itself. For the first time in almost 50 years, Ralph made a decision that shocked the industry. On September 29, 2015, he announced he was stepping down as CEO. He'd remain executive chairman and chief creative officer, but he handed operational control to Stefan Larsson, who delivered a stunning turnaround as global president of Old Navy. Ralph encouraged Larsson to bring fresh thinking, to shake things up, to modernize the company. Larsson launched a plan called Way Forward. He closed 50 underperforming stores. He cut 1,000 jobs. He shortened the design-to-manufacture timeline from 15 months to 9. He focused the company on its core brands, Polo, Ralph Lauren, and Lauren. On paper, all of it made sense. But there was one problem. A fundamental, unfixable problem. Ralph couldn't let go. This was his company, his vision, his life's work. He had built it from nothing, survived every crisis, created an empire that defined American fashion for half a century. And now someone else was making decisions about creative talent, about marketing, about the brand DNA Ralph had spent decades perfecting. Don't scroll past this. This is the most human moment in the entire story. It was never really about the numbers or the strategy. It was about how impossible it is to hand your own creation, your own soul to someone else, even to save the business. The tension became unavoidable. By May 2017, Larsson was gone. 20 months. That's all he lasted. Reports said the two men agreed on where the company should go, but not on how to get there. The truth was simpler. Ralph couldn't hand control of his creation to anyone. Not Larsson, not anyone. The search for a new CEO began. Ralph needed someone who understood this wasn't just a fashion company. It was his life, his identity, his legacy. In July 2017, he found that person in Patrice Louvet, a Procter & Gamble veteran coming from a world of toothpaste and razors, but bringing exactly what Ralph needed: business discipline without creative interference. Louvet's contract carried an unusual but necessary provision. Ralph retained final say over every brand and creative decision, as well as hiring and firing senior design and marketing executives. Louvet would handle strategy, execution, and business results. Ralph would protect the soul of the company. The arrangement was crystal clear. This was still Ralph's company. Louvet was just running it. And it worked. Under Louvet, Ralph Lauren staged a remarkable turnaround. They pulled back from outlet stores, cutting the brand's presence in off-price retail by 40%. They cut inventory by 16%. They doubled down on their core products: polo shirts, cable knit sweaters, the flag sweater, items that sold year after year, no matter what the trends were doing. They invested heavily in digital and e-commerce, turning the website into a genuine luxury shopping experience. They pulled the brand back toward luxury positioning, closing weak stores while opening flagships in key markets. They partnered with Wimbledon and the US Open, reinforcing the brand's ties to elite sport and aristocratic tradition. Most importantly, they remembered what had made Ralph Lauren special in the first place: timelessness, quality, the promise of American style. They stopped chasing trends and doubled down on classics. Don't scroll past this. Sit with this idea for a second. Saving the company didn't take a revolutionary new idea. It took going back to the one principle everything started with 60 years earlier, in a single drawer of a desk. By 2024, annual revenue had grown to $6.6 billion, up from the crisis lows. Gross margins expanded by 190 basis points. The company was profitable, healthy, relevant again. The stock had recovered, more than doubling off its 2016 lows. Direct-to-consumer business was booming, with over 5 million new customers added in a single year. People who'd grown up wearing polo were now buying it for their own kids. The brand had survived its crisis and come out stronger, leaner, more focused. Just like Ralph himself had survived every setback in his life by refusing to compromise his vision. Today, Ralph Lauren's net worth is estimated at around $12 billion, making him one of the wealthiest fashion designers in history. The company generates over $6 billion a year and sells on every continent. There are hundreds of stores worldwide, from flagship locations in Manhattan and London to boutiques in Shanghai and Tokyo. The polo player logo is recognized instantly across the globe. On shirts, on home goods, on fragrance bottles, even on paint cans. More than 50 years after he sold his first tie, Ralph Lauren remains one of the most valuable fashion brands on earth. He has dressed everyone from Nancy Reagan to Melania Trump, from Robert Redford to Kanye West. He designed the costumes for The Great Gatsby and for Annie Hall, two films that defined their eras. He designed Team USA's Olympic uniforms across multiple games, dressing American athletes on the world's biggest stage. Queen Elizabeth II knighted him, the first American designer ever given that honor. He owns a car collection worth over $350 million, including a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO and a Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic. He owns a 17,000-acre ranch in Colorado and several estates that embody the very lifestyle he spent decades selling. But Ralph's legacy isn't about the numbers or the honors. It's about what he proved. People always asked how a Jewish kid from the Bronx could design preppy clothes. Does it have to do with class and money? Ralph's answer was always the same. It has to do with dreams. Ralph Lauren proved you don't need to be born into wealth to understand elegance. You don't need formal training to build a fashion empire. You don't need connections or privilege to create something timeless. What you need is vision, the courage to walk away from a bad deal, the discipline to save your company when it's failing, the wisdom to hire people who cover your weaknesses, and the relentless belief that your dreams matter. Asked about his life's journey, Ralph said his life had been a dream. If someone wrote a story about it, it would seem unbelievable. He said it was the kind of story you'd read and think, no, that's not possible. But it was possible. Ralph proved it. A boy who shared a bedroom with his brothers in a Bronx apartment. A boy who changed his name to escape bullying. A boy who sold ties out of a desk drawer in the Empire State Building. A boy who walked away from Bloomingdale's when they demanded he compromise his vision. A man who nearly lost everything in 1970 but saved his company with his own life savings. A man who built a $10 billion empire selling not just clothes, but an entire American dream. That's the real genius of Ralph Lauren. He didn't just design clothes, he designed dreams. Dreams that a poor kid from the Bronx could become somebody. Dreams that putting on a polo shirt could make you feel part of something bigger. Dreams that quality and style aren't reserved for people born into privilege. Dreams that the American promise of reinvention and success is real and achievable. Ralph Lauren's legacy lives on in every person who puts on a polo shirt and feels a little more confident. In every student who wears their first blazer to a job interview. In every dreamer who looks at their circumstances and decides those circumstances don't define what's possible. He proved that with imagination, discipline, and unshakable self-belief, you can build anything. And he did it without ever forgetting the boy from the Bronx who pressed his nose against department store windows and believed he could build something better than what already existed. That boy changed his name, changed his life, and changed American fashion forever. That's how a poor Bronx boy created Ralph Lauren. Drop a number from 1 to 5 in the comments. Which moment in this story hit you hardest? Walking away from Bloomingdale's, saving the company with his own savings, the brain tumor diagnosis in 1987, the fight to win back control of his own company, or the final turnaround. Send this to one specific person you know, someone who's sitting on their own idea right now because they're afraid the world isn't ready for them. This might be exactly the push that changes their mind. Next week, we're covering another story, a man who never drank a single drop of alcohol in his life, yet built the best-selling whiskey brand on the planet. And there's a chapter in that story the company itself preferred to keep quiet for a long time.